If you could just let me, name and where you're from would be helpful too. Yes.
I'll start.
Yep.
Martha Moore from Nelson, as you know.
Can you stand up, please?
Oh, yep, sorry. Martha Moore from Nelson. Recently, the legislature passed a Tier 5 for state employees and teachers, changing how they contribute to the retirement system and a lot of other things. And along with that passage was the intent to offer an incentive for teachers who have been teaching quite a while to retire. I understand it's not quite an incentive. I was wondering if you could explain where that is and what the timeline might be, because people need to know.
Sure, yes. First of all, the issue of the Tier 5 law that was enacted in December, while that will not provide the state or really any local governments or school districts any significant savings this year, the out years, and Tier 5 means all new public employees at any level of government and teachers as well, will be entering a new tier, Tier 5, which will help reduce costs for local governments and school districts, particularly in the out years, as those who are in the lower tiers retire from our system, and those jobs are filled by younger individuals who will be in this new Tier 5, that will realize significant savings. In regard to your specific question, there was legislative intent in the Tier 5 law to create a 55-25 early retirement incentive, for lack of a better term. The intent was there. It's not in law, so the legislature would have to, this year, enact a law to allow school districts to offer a retirement incentive, 55 years old with 25 years of service. The thought being, and most of the school districts, school superintendents and school board members that I have met with have made that a very, very high priority because the governor's proposed significant cuts to education once again this year. And from a school district perspective, their thought is the degree to which you can offer teachers who have been in the system for a long period of time and therefore are at the higher end of the pay scale an opportunity to leave service and have those, either not have those positions filled depending on what the state aid formula is, or to replace those positions with lower paid younger teachers that will save those school districts resources. So answer to your question is further legislative action would have to be taken. I can't tell you if and when that's actually going to happen. There is a bill that's been introduced in both houses of the legislature. The timing of it is significant because as school districts prepare their budgets in late March and early April to go before all of us as voters on May, whatever it is this year, May 15th or so, they need to know that information sooner rather than later so they know which teachers will take advantage of that. Does that answer your question? Kind of.
Thruway. I've always wondered why it's free around Albany and not around any other metropolitan area in the state. And especially when they're raising the rates on the Thruway. And that causes more drops in the volume.
Yeah.
And you can drive across the whole state of Massachusetts on I-90 for less than you can drive from here to the Mass border. And I mean, so it's a high-priced highway, and I don't see why Albany, I mean, wouldn't another way to get revenue be to have it not be a freeway around Albany, or it's going to be fair, it ought to be around Syracuse, Rochester, or Buffalo.
Yeah, yeah. There have been attempts, I actually have introduced legislation to, as it relates to the Syracuse exits, to look at reduced toll or no toll from the perspective that that's a commuter road for those of us who live here.
I forgot to identify myself.
That's okay.
Stand up.
That's all right. That's okay.
Chuck Anderson, I live in the village.
Okay. I don't know the history of the Albany situation. I do know, as we probably all remember, when the bonds that built the Thruway were paid off in the mid-1990s. The decision at that time was made by the legislature at that time and Governor Pataki at that time that instead of removing the tolls and having the general fund of the state support the maintenance of the thruway as the general fund supports the maintenance of of the rest of the state highway and interstate system, that it would continue to be a user highway. Specifics of the Albany question, my sense is it's probably been that way for a while. I don't know the history
Oh, I'm sure, yeah.
of,
it has been.
yeah, I don't know how that came to be. Yeah.
Senator Valesky and Ida, the budget that we have in place for our city is very tight. I mean, there's no money for street improvements next year. My biggest worry, quite frankly, is next year, I think we're facing layoffs, and I'm trying to head that off in the past. The biggest single item that we have in our budget is if there can be some reform on pension costs. That's the single most item. Your CSEA has certain costs, and your fireman and another. It's very expensive because of the fact that we're being required to put so much money into the bank for these retirements over a very long period of time. If that time could be shortened, it could be dealt with a little easier.
Tier 5 will help, but not right away. We should look at ways to help address that specific issue for local governments. The only thing I would add, it's not directly related to your question, but it's related to the overall cost of government. And that is, the Attorney General, Andrew Cuomo, led an effort last year that has now resulted in a new law that makes it much easier for those local governments, towns, villages across the state, those that want to consolidate services, those that want to actually do an outright merger of village into town or whatever the case might be, to actually do so. It also, by the way, has the new process that we put in law is one that is not only dependent on an initiative coming from the government to do that kind of a merger, but if there, for example, if there is sufficient support in the village of Cazenovia, let's say, to merge with the town of Cazenovia, that there's a petition process, a citizen petition process, go out and gather enough signatures to actually do that. We have not seen to date in central New York any local localities formally proposed to do this yet. There have been, in the North Country, there have been a handful of villages that are moving forward under this new law. In the Hudson Valley, there are a few. So I don't have a sense as to whether that's something that's going to be aggressively proposed in this area of the state, either by local government officials or by citizens. But I think it is significant from the perspective of the state removing a lot of the obstacles that really before last year sort of prevented those localities who wanted to merge or share services from actually doing so. Time will tell as to whether it's being used. Yes?
Helen Beal, Cazenovia, in as much as you've raised the issue of the shared services, and we actually, as a citizens group, are looking at potential for sharing services, I wonder if in the current budget or the proposed future budget, there'll be continued aid for studies and implementation of shared services or consolidation.
I believe there will, although I'll look at Troy Waffner, my legislative director.
There is money included in the budget. It's down from what it was back then.
They're still current for this year?
The governor's proposed funding.
What about in the current year? Is there any left?
I don't know if that money's all been expended or appropriated for specific projects. We can look into that.
Thank you. Because I had actually sent an email to the Department of State, but I didn't get a response. So
We'll get an answer.